What's up everyone, it's Russo. I hope everyone is doing well. Please follow my Instagram at Russo Lifts, just in case something happens to this YouTube channel. You can follow, message, and you can watch my daily story content on Instagram. I'll see you there. What's up everyone, it's Russo. I hope everyone is doing well. Got a little bit of a mic switch up with the C-stand and the boom pole, so this ASMR sip I have to do it facing upwards. I already choked on one take, so let's... Hopefully you heard that nice hard swallow. But today we're going to be talking about cabergoline, how dangerous it is, and why I think more people should stay away from CABER entirely, as well as the benefits why people use CABER, and overall my thoughts on how it relates to Tony Huge's heart attack. I'm going to go into what CABER is, the side effects it causes, why you should avoid it, but let's backtrack and go into AI. So I've already discussed on this channel how bad AIs are for you. Now I'm gonna go into why anti-prolactins are bad for you, specifically CABER, because CABER is one of those drugs that, you know, when you're on Deca, when you're on MPP, it's commonly thrown in there, right? You wanna control prolactin. You know, prolactin is associated with lactating nipples in men, prolactin-based gyno, stuff people really wanna avoid. So CABER is heavily used and it has some pretty nasty side effects on the heart, which I'm going to go into later in the video. But let's get into what CABER does. So for my references, I have 2 NCBI studies up on my laptop, and I'm sourcing the Anabolics 11th edition by William Lellens. So just FYI, this is sourced and backed, and I went out of my way to dig through and have all the information in front of me, but this does not weigh my personal opinion on what is happening as far as when you combine CABER with a nandrolone. So let's get started. So cabergoline is a selective dopamine receptor agonist that specifically has a high binding affinity to the D2 receptor, and it has a low binding affinity to the D1, A1, and A2 receptors. So CABER essentially, you know, mimics dopamine and will bind up with all the D2 receptors, which then is the negative feedback loop for prolactin secretion, thus being an anti-prolactin. That is what it's used for. Prolactin buildup normally happens with tren, NPP, Deca. You normally see this ancillary compound used to regulate prolactin levels. What happens when prolactin gets too high? I already mentioned that you can shoot fluid out of your nipples. It looks like breast milk, kind of. Obviously gynecomastia associated with that, and higher prolactin also leads towards erectile dysfunction, right? This is where Deca dick, you know, is concerned. When, you know, you go into a sexual encounter, you can get it up. As you're continuing, you either have trouble reaching a climax. As prolactin gets even higher, it's like you can get it up, but you can't keep it up, right? It'll just randomly go soft during the encounter. That is a sign of high prolactin. That is why CABER is so heavily abused, constantly used, especially with nandrolone, right? With Deca, with nandrolone phenylpropionate. It's really, you know, used in those sort of cycles constantly, which when you look at what nandrolone does to the heart, aka left ventricular hypertrophy, overall heart growth, you'll see how these side effects are not very good when it comes to that. But let's go into the other reason why people use CABER, and I touched on this in my sex video with my girlfriend. So for all the OG subscribers who already watched that and are still left after everyone clicked off to go watch that video, basically CABER can allow you to have multiple orgasms in the same round. So that is really a ploy and benefit of CABER. When you have prolactin super low, it decreases the amount of time it takes to recover in between rounds, and you can even just like bust a nut, go right back in and have a whole separate orgasm, right? So when it comes to sex drugs, CABER is up there, and CABER also just increases your overall orgasm pleasure, right? So keep that into consideration. That is why Tony would use CABER constantly. It increases sex. You know, it increases the pleasure in sex. It heightens the sex. Very hard to go down if you're using CABER constantly. So we already touched on CABER is inhibiting dopamine, and dopamine is basically the negative feedback to release prolactin. So CABER goes around and binds up all the D2 receptors to lower your prolactin. Now, let's get into the nasty side effects. So the main side effect you should be concerned with CABER, and why you should very sparingly use CABER, and understand that you are potentially going to cause some heart damage, right? So the main thing with CABER is, I'll just put it on the screen, have Andrew put it on the screen, cardiac valvopathy. Again, not a doctor, just a biohacker that documents my cycles here. But basically, I'll read the definition. Valvular heart disease or cardiac valvopathies describes any acquired or congenital disease affecting one or more of the 4 cardiac valves. So I'll have Andrew throw up a picture of the 4 cardiac valves. It essentially weakens them. If you use it constantly, it is going to weaken them and possibly cause significant damage that would require, invasive, surgery on the heart. These valves, super delicate. CABER has been shown time and time again to impact these negatively, even at lower dosages. So when I look at and talk to Tony about his heart attack, right, I was like, did CABER have something to do with this? I'll have Tony on the channel to discuss what he thinks, and hear his side of the story. But yeah, he says he would use CABER a lot, but in a low dosage. I definitely think that combined with the COVID, that combined with him being lazy, never doing cardio, using biochemistry to get around a shitty diet, and then adding in the CABER, the other sex drugs he's on, and all the other recreational drugs that he might be using. I think CABER played a significant role in the current heart damage that he has right now, and we will know the extent after he gets that heart surgery. So yeah, not a good drug. I don't understand why people are just still using CABER year after year constantly. That's what I want to see stop, right? If your prolactin's out of control and you can't get your dick up, you have Deca, add in the ancillary compound to stop the cascading side effect. But if you're just running CABER blindly on Deca, MPP, or Tren, or you're just running CABER to have multiple orgasms constantly, the risk versus reward ratio isn't really that good in my opinion, right? You don't want to be dealing with significant heart damage because you wanted to come 2 or 3 times more in a sexual encounter, and you can learn how to do that naturally actually. But CABER is like one of those, it's like kind of like Adderall. Like Adderall allows you to see what your brain can operate at, and then you can get back there naturally. I think CABER allows you to see how you could be in a sexual encounter, and then you can work your way to get back there naturally. But if you're relying on CABER for that, it's not good, right? And now let's go into my final thing on how CABER is normally used with Deca and Deca's impact on the heart. Deca is horrible on the heart. MPP is horrible on the heart. When you look at heart growth, left ventricular hypertrophy, Deca is really associated with that. And I'm actually gonna get Alec to show his heart scans because he has multiple EKGs documenting his heart growth, and the biggest jumps in size were when he was using Deca nandrolone phenylpropionate, because Alec built a lot of his size using Deca nandrolone phenylpropionate because it doesn't cause that much hair loss, but it does increase the size of the heart. Now that you know that Deca nandrolone phenylpropionate is really bad for the heart, increases your blood pressure, increases the size of your heart, left ventricular hypertrophy, let's combine that with the ancillary drug that causes fuck-ups with your 4 cardiac valves, aka CABER. You can see how this is a recipe for disaster that most common bodybuilders have no idea that they're doing for themselves, and especially when you look at the typical length of a Deca cycle, right? It's over 16 weeks if you really want Deca to work and to get the results out of Deca, and then Deca stays in your system up to 6 months, possibly even longer. You can get metabolites of Deca, 6 months after your last pin. So if you're blanketing using CABER that entire time, you are dumping gasoline on a fire. there. And if you're using CABER in high dosages to get that, you know, the sex drug part of CABER and use that in sexual encounters all the time, combined with the high blood pressure that, you know, Deca and androstenedione normally causes, and combining with the heart growth that it's causing as well, recipe for disaster. CABER is a nasty compound, should only be used sparingly if, you know, the prolactin's out of control by all means. But a lot of guys just like, I have to take CABER when I take Deca. I have to take CABER when I take MPP. I have to take CABER when I take Trent. Everything has a side effect. Like, these AIs have side effects. These anti-prolactins have side effects. I think most bodybuilders think of the context of, oh, only the steroid has side effects. The ancillary compound could have even more side effects, or could be synergistic with the side effects that are already occurring, like what is happening with CABER and MPP. So keep that in mind. It's really, really unnerving when I read people's, you know, sex stacks, and it's like Cialis, you know, all the roots, and then, you know, vasodilators as well on top of the Cialis, and then I see CABER thrown in there so they can come multiple times in the same rounds, and it's like, if you're doing that all the time, you're gonna have something happen to your heart. No offense. But really, I just wanted to hit home that, like, don't use an ancillary compound unless you need it, unless you pull bloods and see your prolactins off the charts, unless like you have horrible Deca dick and can't get your dick to work at all, or it gets up and goes soft, then you add in the ancillary that's going to cause more damage but is going to fix the cascading side effect, right? And then you taper it off and you try and mitigate that, and then you could switch over to something like mega dosing vitamin B6 once it's under control to keep the prolactin more in check. But by abusing CABER constantly, it's a recipe for disaster. I will see you guys in my next video.